Did you see what happened when Barbra Streisand finally revealed the secret she kept about Neil Diamond for over 40 years? For decades, people wondered about the real story behind their iconic duet and their undeniable chemistry, but both stars remained silent, guarding something deeply personal. But when Barbra finally spoke out in a recent interview, what she revealed left the entire music world stunned and explained so much about their legendary collaboration. The truth behind their relationship and what really happened during the recording of You Don't Bring Me Flowers changes everything we thought we knew. Stay until the end, because this story will show you that sometimes the greatest art comes from the most complicated emotions. It was the fall of 1978, and two of the biggest names in music were about to create something that would become one of the most iconic duets in history. Barbra Streisand was already a superstar, a woman who had conquered every medium she touched. She had won Academy Awards for her acting, Grammy Awards for her singing, and had become a cultural icon known for her perfectionism, her powerful voice, and her refusal to compromise her artistic vision. She was demanding, she was difficult, she was brilliant, and she was one of the most successful entertainers of her generation. Neil Diamond was equally legendary in his own right. He had written and performed countless hits, songs that had become part of the soundtrack of American life. Sweet Caroline, Cracklin' Rosie, I Am I Said. These were not just songs, but cultural touchstones that millions of people had sung along to, cried to, fallen in love to. Neil was known for his warm, powerful voice, his masterful songwriting, and his ability to connect emotionally with audiences in a way that few artists could match. Both Barbra and Neil had been in the music industry for years, and they knew each other professionally. They moved in the same circles, attended the same industry events, had mutual friends and collaborators. But they had never worked together, never recorded together, never created anything as a team. They were both such strong personalities, such perfectionists about their work, that the idea of collaborating seemed almost impossible. How could two people who were each accustomed to complete creative control work together without clashing? The song You Don't Bring Me Flowers had an interesting history. Neil Diamond had originally written and recorded it as a solo track for his album, I'm Glad You're Here With Me Tonight. It was a beautiful, melancholic song about a relationship that had lost its romance, about two people who had stopped making efforts for each other, who had let love fade into routine and indifference. The lyrics were poignant and relatable, capturing that moment when you realize that the person you love no longer does the little things that once made you feel special. Neil's solo version was successful and got radio play, but something unexpected happened. A radio DJ in Louisville, Kentucky, named Gary Guthrie, had both Neil's version and a solo version that Barbra had recorded of the same song. She had included it on her album Songbird, also as a solo track. Gary Guthrie, either out of curiosity or inspiration, decided to edit the two versions together, creating an artificial duet by splicing Barbra's vocal take with Neil's. He played this homemade duet on his radio show, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. Listeners went crazy for it. The switchboard lit up with calls from people wanting to know where they could buy this duet version. The chemistry between the two voices, even though they had been recorded separately and had never been intended to be together, was undeniable. Other radio stations heard about it and started playing Gary's edited version. Within weeks, this unofficial duet was being requested more than almost any other song on the radio. The record executives at Columbia Records, which had both Barbra and Neil under contract, saw an opportunity. If an edited-together version was this popular, imagine how powerful a real duet would be, with both artists actually in the studio together, singing to each other, creating something intentional rather than accidental. They approached both Barbra and Neil with the idea of recording an official duet version. Both artists were hesitant. Barbra was in the middle of other projects and was notoriously selective about her collaborations. She did not work with just anyone, and she had specific ideas about how her vocals should sound, how songs should be produced, how everything should be perfect. Neil was equally particular about his work, and he had already recorded his definitive version of the song. Did it need to be redone? Would working with another artist, even one as talented as Barbra, improve it or dilute it? But the record label was persuasive, and both artists could hear the potential in the idea. After some negotiation about production credits, studio time, and creative control, they agreed to do it. A recording session was scheduled for late 1978 in Los Angeles. Both Barbra and Neil would come to the studio, they would record the song together, and hopefully they would create something that lived up to the expectations that the radio-edited version had generated. The day of the recording session arrived, and there was tension in the air. Studio musicians who were there that day later said that you could feel the energy the moment Barbra and Neil walked in. These were two titans of the music industry, two people with legendary perfectionism and strong opinions about to work together for the first time. Everyone wondered if they would clash, if there would be arguments about interpretation or arrangement or production choices. But something unexpected happened when Barbra and Neil stood together at the microphone. The song "You Don't Bring Me Flowers" is deeply emotional, a conversation between two people whose love is dying, who are going through the motions but have lost the connection. To sing it convincingly, to make it real, you have to tap into real emotions, real pain, real longing. And as they began to sing, something shifted in the room. Neil looked at Barbra as he sang his lines, and she looked at him as she sang hers. They were not just reading lyrics off a page, they were having a conversation, a deeply personal conversation about love and loss and regret. The emotion in both their voices was palpable. Barbra's voice, with its incredible power and vulnerability, conveyed the pain of a woman watching her relationship crumble. Neil's voice, warm but tinged with sadness, conveyed the helplessness of a man who knows he has failed but does not know how to fix it. The musicians in the studio stopped what they were doing and just listened. The producer in the booth leaned forward, transfixed. Something was happening that went beyond a professional recording session. This was real. Whatever Barbra and Neil were feeling as they sang to each other, it was coming through in every note, every word, every pause. When they finished the first take, there was silence in the studio. Then someone started to clap, and then everyone was applauding. Barbra and Neil looked at each other with an expression that people in the studio that day would later describe as complicated, a mixture of surprise and recognition, and something deeper that was hard to name. They had just created something extraordinary, and they both knew it. The official duet version of "You Don't Bring Me Flowers" was released in November 1978, and it was an instant massive hit. It shot to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, where it stayed for 2 weeks. It became one of the best-selling singles of the year. The song was everywhere, played on every radio station, discussed by every music critic, sung by couples and heartbroken individuals across America and around the world. But more than just the commercial success, people were fascinated by the chemistry between Barbra and Neil. When they performed the song together on television specials and award shows, the connection between them was electric. The way they looked at each other, the way their voices blended, the emotion in their performance, it all seemed too real to be just acting. People began to wonder, was there something going on between Barbra Streisand and Neil Diamond? Were they involved romantically? What was the real story behind their incredible chemistry? Both Barbra and Neil were asked about it constantly in interviews. Were they in a relationship? Had they ever been in a relationship? What was really going on between them? And both of them gave vague, carefully worded answers that neither confirmed nor denied anything. They would say things like, "We have great respect for each other," or "We connected through the music," or "Some things are private." The more evasive they were, the more people speculated. What would you do if you had to work closely with someone you had complicated feelings for? Would you be able to keep it professional, or would the emotions get in the way? Leave your answer in the comments and tell us how you would handle this situation. The speculation continued for years. Music journalists wrote articles analyzing their relationship. Fans debated whether they were secretly in love. Every time Barbra and Neil were seen together at an event, people watched their body language for clues. But neither one ever confirmed or denied the rumors. They maintained their silence for 40 years, even as both went on to have other relationships, other marriages, other chapters in their personal lives. Barbra Streisand married actor James Brolin in 1998 and seemed to find lasting happiness with him. Neil Diamond married his longtime partner Katie McNeil in 2012. Both seem to have moved on, to have found peace and love with their respective spouses. And still, the question lingered. What had really happened between them during that recording session in 1978? What was the secret behind their undeniable chemistry? Then, in 2023, during an interview for a documentary about her life and career, Barbra Streisand finally spoke about it. The interviewer asked her about "You Don't Bring Me Flowers" and about her collaboration with Neil Diamond, and instead of giving her usual vague response, Barbra paused. You could see her considering whether to finally tell the truth, whether after 45 years it was time to let the secret out. And then she began to talk. Barbra revealed that when she and Neil had stood at that microphone together in 1978, something unexpected had happened. They had known each other professionally for years, but they had never spent significant time together one-on-one. As they sang that song, as they looked into each other's eyes and channeled the emotion of two people whose love was dying, they connected on a level that surprised both of them. Barbra said that she and Neil had recognized in each other something that went beyond professional admiration. There was an attraction, yes, but more than that, there was an understanding. They were both complicated people, perfectionists, artists who were often misunderstood by others. They both knew what it was like to be driven to the point where relationships suffered, to be so focused on their art that everything else became secondary. In each other, they saw a reflection of themselves. After the recording session ended, Barbra and Neil had talked for hours. They went to dinner, not as a date, but as two people who had just experienced something profound and needed to process it. They talked about their careers, their struggles, their fears, their loneliness despite being surrounded by people and fame. They talked about what it cost to be who they were, about the relationships that had failed because they could not turn off their ambition, could not be anything other than who they were. And in those conversations, feelings developed, real feelings, romantic feelings. For a brief period of time, Barbra admitted, she and Neil had been emotionally involved. Not a full-blown affair, not a dramatic romance, but something real and significant nonetheless. They had both been in complicated situations in their personal lives at the time, both dealing with relationships that were struggling, and they had found in each other a connection that felt rare and precious. But both Barbra and Neil were smart enough to know that acting on those feelings would be a mistake. They were too similar, both too strong-willed, both too focused on their careers. A relationship between them would be intense and probably destructive. They would either have to compromise who they were, or they would clash until they destroyed what they had. So they made the difficult decision to step back, to preserve their friendship and their professional relationship, but not to pursue anything romantic. Barbra said that the decision was mutual but painful. For a while, it was hard for them to be around each other. The feelings did not just disappear because they decided not to act on them, but over time, the intensity faded, and they were able to maintain a respectful friendship. They continued to speak occasionally over the years to support each other's work from a distance, but they never worked together again. It would have been too complicated, too emotionally charged. When Barbra revealed all this in the interview, it created a sensation. After 45 years of speculation, here was the truth. They had felt something real. The chemistry everyone had seen was not manufactured for the cameras. It was genuine, but they had chosen not to pursue it, had chosen their careers and their existing relationships over what might have been. The revelation explained so much. It explained why their performance of You Don't Bring Me Flowers had been so emotionally powerful. It explained why they had never collaborated again, despite the massive success of their duet. It explained the careful way they had always talked about each other in interviews, with respect and warmth, but also a certain guardedness. They had been protecting a secret, protecting what had almost been, protecting each other from scrutiny and judgment. Neil Diamond, when asked to comment on Barbra's revelation, released a brief statement. He confirmed that what Barbra had said was true, that they had shared a connection during that time, that it had been real and meaningful, but that they had both agreed it was not meant to be pursued. He said he had enormous respect for Barbra, for her talent and for her discretion in keeping their private feelings private for so many years. He said he was glad that the truth was finally out, because it honored what they had experienced together without sensationalizing it. The public reaction was mixed. Some people felt vindicated. They had always suspected something was there, and now they had confirmation. Some people were disappointed that Barbra and Neil had not ended up together, imagining what might have been if two such talented people had combined their lives as well as their voices. Some people respected their decision to prioritize their careers and existing relationships over a potentially destructive romance. But most people, after hearing the full story, felt a kind of melancholy recognition. How many people have experienced something similar, have met someone who could have been important, could have been significant, but the timing was wrong or the circumstances were impossible, have felt a real connection, but made the mature, responsible decision to walk away. Barbra and Neil's story was not just a celebrity secret, it was a deeply human story about choices and sacrifice and the roads not taken. The story of Barbra and Neil teaches us several important lessons. First, it teaches us that the most powerful art often comes from the most complicated emotions. That duet would not have been as moving, as unforgettable, if it had just been two professionals doing a job. It was powerful because real feelings were flowing through it, because the emotion was genuine, even if the circumstances were impossible. Second, it teaches us about the maturity required to walk away from something you want, but know is not right. Barbra and Neil both felt the attraction, both felt the connection, but they were self-aware enough to know that acting on it would cause more problems than it would solve. That kind of self-control and wisdom is rare, especially when feelings are intense. Third, the story teaches us that you can respect and care for someone deeply without needing to possess them or be in a relationship with them. Barbra and Neil maintained their respect and affection for each other over decades without it needing to turn into something more. That is a kind of love, too, the love that says I care about you enough to let you live your life without me in the starring role. Fourth, this story teaches us about the importance of privacy and discretion. For 45 years, Barbra and Neil kept their secret. They did not sell their story to tabloids. They did not write tell-all books. They did not exploit what had happened between them for publicity or profit. They kept it private because it was personal and precious, and only shared it when enough time had passed that it could be told without causing harm. Fifth, the story teaches us that you can have multiple loves in one lifetime, that connection can happen with different people in different ways. Barbra went on to find happiness with James Brolin. Neil found happiness with Katie McNeil. But that does not mean what they felt for each other in 1978 was not real or important. Life is not as simple as one true love. We can connect deeply with multiple people, and each connection teaches us something and changes us in some way. The story also illustrates the sacrifices that come with fame and ambition. Both Barbra and Neil had given up aspects of normal life to pursue their careers at the highest level. They had both had failed marriages, troubled relationships, periods of loneliness. When they met each other, they found someone who understood that particular burden. But pursuing a relationship would have meant potentially derailing everything they had worked for. The price of being extraordinary is often being alone. Barbra and Neil's story reminds us that some questions are better left unanswered for a very long time. If they had revealed their feelings in 1978 or 1980, it would have become a tabloid circus. It would have overshadowed their work and turned something private and meaningful into entertainment for others. By waiting 45 years, they ensured that the story could be told with dignity and perspective. The revelation also changes how we listen to "You Don't Bring Me Flowers Now." Knowing what we know, the song becomes even more powerful. When Barbra sings about remembering when love was new and exciting, when Neil sings about letting the romance die through neglect, we hear not just the lyrics but the real feelings between them. The song becomes a document of what was and what could not be. Looking at both their careers, "You Don't Bring Me Flowers" stands as a unique moment. Barbra never did another duet quite like it. Neil never collaborated with another artist in quite that way again. It was a singular moment when two legends came together and created something that transcended the professional and touched the personal. And now we know why it felt so special, because it was special, because real feelings were involved. In the years since Barbra's revelation, both artists have continued their careers. Barbra, now in her 80s, has become a legend who has influenced generations of performers. Neil, also in his 80s, has retired from touring due to Parkinson's disease, but his music continues to touch millions. They each built extraordinary lives and careers, and they each found their own forms of happiness. But that moment in 1978, standing at a microphone together, singing about love fading while feeling a new attraction blooming, that moment remains frozen in time. It produced one perfect song, one perfect performance, and one secret that they kept for 45 years. The fact that they could feel what they felt and still choose to walk away speaks to the complexity of being human, the difficulty of making wise choices when emotions are involved, the bittersweet nature of connections that cannot be fully realized. Thank you for listening to this incredible true story of talent, attraction, wisdom, and the roads not taken. I hope it has made you think about the complicated choices we all face when feelings develop in impossible circumstances. Remember, Barbra Streisand and Neil Diamond felt something real but chose not to pursue it, and both went on to have meaningful lives and careers. Sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes the greatest respect you can show someone is allowing them to live their life without you in it romantically. Sometimes the most mature choice is the hardest choice. Subscribe to this channel for more true stories about the complicated lives of legendary artists. And remember that real life is always more interesting and more complex than the simple narratives we imagine. God bless you all.